All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Millennials World podcast. And you know what, Brian? I've been thinking, right? Like this week, I've been meaning to watch just the most famous comic book movies I could possibly think of. And Brian, of course, you and I both agree this is probably the single best time in comic book movie history. But I thought to myself, let's go back to, I don't know, maybe the 90s. I think we would argue is the peak time of comic book movies. Would you agree with that in general?
Yeah, I would. If we're being sincere, I would say that it's the most interesting time, maybe not the most consistent.
Yes, such classics as the Shaquille O'Neal movie Real Steel and the Dolph Lundgren fucking Punisher movie, or I think even the Reb Brown Captain America movie came out in the 90s. So,
Very early 90s, yep.
the very most famous comic book movies. But you know what? There's one that a lot of people don't talk about, which I think many people would argue is the single best. It's called The Phantom. Have you heard of it?
Yeah, I've avoided it because it sounded scary.
It did. But you know what, Brian? I always love pushing your buttons and pushing your boundaries. So you know what? This week we're going to review The Phantom. But before we get into our review, Brian, let's bring back our segment, Cringe Millennial of the Week, Cringe Generation Moment of the
Weak.
Week.
And actually, an addendum to that, stirring the pot, this is our first, maybe our second cringe zoomer of the week. So, how much do you know about Daniel Larson, Taylor?
To be honest with you, when you mentioned Daniel Larson earlier, I thought you meant Nathan Larson, the former libertarian congressional candidate who kidnapped a 12-year-old and later starved to death in prison. I thought that's who you were talking about.
Well, there are at least two reasons that both of these Larsons may have more in common than you'd think.
Oh no.
So just buckle in. It's going to be not real long, but I think it's from an aging millennial standpoint. I've kind of want to see what your thoughts are on this. Daniel Larson, just a quick recap, is a TikTok star. We'll say he's a star. He was born in 1998, so right on the cusp. You could argue he's a millennial. I'd say that's steadily in Zoomer category. First started posting online in 2020. Daniel has had a bit of a tumultuous life. In his early childhood, was severely neglected and wound up in various foster care, including with his grandmother for many years. He has schizoaffective disorder, bipolar disorder, attention deficit disorder, which is obviously not like the same as the other, and he is on the autism spectrum. It's this confluence of things. Now, obviously, all kinds of people can have any combination of disorders and live rich, fulfilling lives. Daniel, it's hard to find information on his early years because he's just this troubled kid. He starts posting on TikTok about how he wants to be an actor and a famous musician, and he's in 2020 maybe a little deluded, right? Like a silly guy. I think people think, oh, this guy thinks he's going to be famous. And he makes this goofy rap music that sounds really bad. And he has it's so bad. But I think, so of course, people find him and they fuck with him and they juice him up. And Daniel, having all these problems that he has, takes this completely at face value, right? He totally is like, I have all these fans. I'm incredibly famous. And this is 100% people fucking with him, like every single one of them. He also has an obsession with another, I think, TikTok celebrity, a young girl named Grace Vanderwaal, who he's been in love with since he was 18 and she was, I think, 12 years old.
Interesting. So he has a lot in common with Nathan Larson already.
There will be more, though. So, people start kind of building him up as they want him to be, I think, like their next roll call, their next Chris Chan. Now, I just want to get this out there. I know the Zoomers want their own Chris Chan from the ground up. It's never going to happen. No one like that will ever exist again. The internet is functionally different than it was in 2008.
100% it is. Absolutely.
So what happens with Daniel Larson is a lot. There is a lot of information, as there are on these people on Daniel Larson. People find his Pinterest account and it's not on private, which I guess is uncommon. I don't use Pinterest, but I guess it's usually you can't see other people's favorite boards. He has a board on there called Girl Crushes, and it's full of like hundreds of pictures of clothing advertisements featuring like preteen models.
Okay.
Not great. Daniel says that that he was hacked, then later says yes, he is all that this is confirms this is his Pinterest account, but that he made it to go viral by outraging people. So this is interesting because there are times when, like, clearly Daniel has problems, probably certain things that you can't scrutinize him for the way you would a functioning person, but especially the stuff around the kid stuff, sometimes people think like, oh, he's been trolled into saying he's a pedophile because he has gone on camera and
Oh,
said, I'm that. I don't know
l-
how many times you want to say the word here, but
listen,
it's,
Brian, I
yeah,
want I want to say something real quick. So
yes, go on.
my favorite attempt at trolling is, haha, you thought I was a pedophile, but I'm just joking. Like,
But he didn't say he was joking. It was like he wasn't sure what to say because he was caught. He didn't even say that.
so, we're talking about Chris Chan, right? A lot of people have posited the theory that people basically trolled him into either actually raping his mother, if people don't know about how fucking Chris Chan did, or like he just lied about it to like impress some troll he was talking to. Do you think that's
Either
kind of what's going on here?
so this is like Chris Chan like speed run. Okay, so Daniel's shit gets extremely escalated. He becomes homeless very quickly. I think in 2021, he has like kind of a mentor figure that helps him buy food and clothes. A guy who's like basically given him money and encouragement since he was a small child because this guy met him and was like, oh, it's this troubled kid. Daniel just completely uses this sweet old man. And this guy continues to help Daniel well into adulthood. Daniel, I don't know where to start. He is extremely violent towards himself. That's why it's hard to actually find his original live streams because while it's sometimes funny seeing him freak out, even though it's that same thing as with Chris Chan where it's like, oh, this is funny to watch, but boy, do I feel bad watching it. But then all of a sudden, Daniel will just start fucking bashing his head in like hard. And then you're like, oh, okay, maybe not so funny. Daniel, in addition to being almost certainly a pedophile, a user of people, having scabies that he refused to get treated when the doctors gave his mentor guy gave him medicine, gave him money to buy medicine to treat his scabies, and instead he bought headphones and just lived with the scabies. And he went down to trolls took him to Disneyland. He was walking around Disneyland with scabies. So in addition to all of this, he really likes to make violent threats because they get him attention, right? He's probably done this since he was a kid, but not just saying, I'm gonna kill you. Like if I said I'm gonna kill Taylor, like that would definitely be legally actionable if I made a TikTok like that. But it would even if it was like unlikely to happen. But Daniel will also say things like, and if you need to edit this out, you can, he will say things like, I am going to bomb the White House. The president has been made aware of these threats. He likes to say things like, if the Secret Service wants to find and arrest me, that's fine. I will just kill their asses. He really likes to make bomb threats. He was kicked out of a hospital once where he was trespassing and then made a TikTok saying that he was going to get a gun and go back and go on a spree shooting at the hospital. And last month, let me find the exact dates. On April 30th, 2024, Daniel Larson was arrested by federal agents and is now facing 65 years in prison.
Oh my God. Okay, it's for the threats, right? It's not for the pedophilia.
It's for the threats, which, by the way, you got to think like they knew this wasn't actual, but at a certain point, you can't let some guy just go around and keep saying this, right? I'm not saying that I necessarily agree with that, but from the Secret Service's standpoint, right?
Yeah, and you said the commonality with Nathan Larson. Of course, Nathan Larson went to federal prison, I think, for 14 months for threatening to kill George W. Bush.
Yeah. So that's where Daniel's at right now. We've probably heard the last of him. You don't really get out of federal charges. It's just not a thing that happens. Certainly not if you're a guy like Daniel.
No, he's going to have a real fucking hard time.
It's likely that right now he doesn't still really understand what's happening. Probably he won't end up in a standard jail, right? He'll probably end up in a jail for people because he is deeply unwell. A different kind of prison, I would assume. But what's interesting to me for our purposes as old millennials, we've brought up Chris Chan a couple times already, is how trolling as a thing and even how lol cows as a thing have changed. So Daniel, throughout his online, let's say, career, has had managers. These are just trolls who say, I'm your manager. And they send him money and they send him a little bit of money to get food or whatever. And they egg him on and they get him to do shit like make fucking threats to federal buildings because they think it's funny or say weird shit or whatever they think is funny. And they call themselves their managers. But they also they enable him. They send him money and they give him all the attention he wants. And they see themselves as like trolling. You and I being from a different generation of the internet, I've said several times here, I came up on Something Awful. It was kind of a formative place for me. Like, I feel like trolling, it used to mean you were doing comedy, right? You found kind of a shitty person and trolling them like you would troll a fish. You'd kind of say some funny shit and wave it in front of these dumb people and you'd get them to say some shitty things. But it seemed, or to do something weird or something, but it was still like them. But it seems like trolling at this point with someone like Daniel Larson, or even someone, maybe what people do to guys like Cyrax might be closer to classic trolling, but it's like, let's find this mentally ill person and ingratiate ourselves deeply into their life. Even the way people troll Christian has like changed. It's gone from the better Christian era trolls, better, it's a weird word, but someone like Liquid Chris, who are doing like a comedy bit because they know Chris will respond in a funny way, right? Versus currently, Christian also has managers.
That's null.
Well, it's not null anymore.
Really?
It hasn't been him for a couple of years.
Oh shit, I didn't know that.
No, it's just some weird Zoomer kids that just they tell him to do and say the most unfunny fucking dead meme shit, and then he gets it, and they tell him go and do a stream, and people will give you money, and of course people give Chris money, and they take a portion of the money, and it's like it's just interesting to me how trolling has changed from this thing where it's like we're doing comedy, we're like kind of using and they're both psycho behavior. I'm not trying to say trolling was ever like better as a thing, but it seems like at one point it was sort of at least sort of creative. It was, we're going to use this person as a springboard for comedy, which is already psycho. But now it's just like, I'm literally just puppet mastering this person who does not live in reality. Now, this does not absolve Daniel of anything he's done. Like the thing with him covering up his predilections toward children and all that demonstrates that he knows the difference between right. But 100%, the people that send him money and egg him on into making threats towards federal buildings or towards hospitals so that he'll stream it and have a meltdown and scream, I'm gonna bomb you, bomb you, bomb you, over and over. They are 100% culpable in that, morally at least, if not legally. This isn't like a fringe case. This seems to be kind of the most popular form of trolling online right now with like Zoomers.
Well, also that and swatting too. That's another one.
Yes, exactly. And there's some crossover there. It's like, is this trolling? Like, this just kind of seems like terrorism.
Well, you know what, Brian, speaking of terrorism and a little trolling, I think that actually goes perfectly into our review here. Would you agree with that? Because yes. I think The Phantom does terrorism and a little bit of trolling. So
I would absolutely say that. And of course, played by Billy Zane himself, an early beloved troll.
Exactly. So that springs perfectly in our review here. So once again, this is The Phantom. Came out in 1996. It was rated PG-13. It was directed by Simon Windsor. And originally, Joe Dante and Joel Schumacher were possibly attached to direct this movie. Now, I don't know about you, Brian. I would have loved to see Joel Schumacher make this movie. This would have been a fucking hilarious Joel Schumacher movie to me.
Schumacher, I think, could have done pretty good. I actually really like Batman Forever, so I can see a type of Schumacher movie where this works. Joe Dante, I think, would have been awesome.
Would have been absolutely fantastic. Either of those choices would have been great, but I still enjoyed what this movie was, but I would have loved to see either of their interpretations, I'll be honest with you. And this movie was written by Jeffrey Boehm, and it was produced by Alan Ladd Jr. and Robert Evans. Not Behind the Bastard Robert Evans, different Robert Evans.
I was going to say.
So Simon Windsor, the director, once again, is most known for directing such movies as Free Willy, Operation Dumbo Drop, this movie, and Crocodile Dundee 3. So one of these movies is not like the other. No, I'm just kidding. But I couldn't imagine Crocodile Dundee 3 is very good. I assume the bit is pretty dead by that point.
Yeah, the first one's fine. It's a dumb, fun movie. I can't imagine the second sequel is any good.
And then Crocodile Dundee 4 was Wolf Creek. So Jeffrey Boehm, the writer, is most known for writing such movies and shows as The Dead Zone, The Lost Boys, we talked about just Joel Schumacher just a moment ago, a movie called The Funny Farm, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Lethal Weapon 2 and 3, and Adventures of Briscoe County Jr. Now,
that makes so much sense, though.
I assume you're at least aware of The Adventures of Briscoe County Jr., or were you a fan of it? Because
I was a fan. I used to have it on DVD. It's good. It's fun.
Good. No, honestly, I just saw the title card and I'm like, I don't know, this looks like a fun little project.
Yeah, it is. Any listeners who are fans of like 90s adventure, fantasy adventure, watch Briscoe. I feel like Bruce Campbell. He's in it a ton. It's awesome.
Hell yeah. And then Alan Ladd Jr., who I mentioned was one of the producers, is most known for producing such films as the original Police Academy, Death Warrant, which is not a rap album. It's apparently a movie. I'd never heard of it. The Brady Bunch movie, this movie, of course, a very Brady Bunch sequel, The Man in the Iron Mask, and he was given a posthumous producing credit for the 2022 Elvis movie, which I thought was very interesting. And Robert Evans, once again, not the BTB Robert Evans, totally different Robert Evans, is most known for being the former head of Paramount Pictures and has produced such movies as, and get ready for this one, Brian, Chinatown, Marathon Man, Urban Cowboy, the 1980s Popeye movie, a movie called Silver, of course, this movie, The Saint, and How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, including, and he was also produced a bunch of other movies as head of Paramount Pictures, like Rosemary's Baby and just a bunch of other fucking movies this guy was involved in.
Truly a storied career.
Yeah, Jesus fucking Christ. And this movie is 100 minutes long. It had a budget of $45 million, but it only grossed $23.5 million. And the next trivia detail I had here was this movie was originally going to be the first of a trilogy. However, after it bombed at the box office, the 2 sequels were canceled, which pretty easy to see why. This movie didn't even make half its fucking budget back. So that's pretty rough.
Yeah. And it doesn't look it looks middle budget. It doesn't look like a huge budget with this.
Yeah, and $45 million in 1996 was a big budget movie. So, I mean, not saying this movie looks bad. I want that to be very clear.
No, it looks fine. I like it.
But for $45 million, there was a few dollars missing. I'll just say that. Just a couple.
You do not see every dollar on screen.
You do not. And speaking of, on Rotten Tomatoes, it has a 44% critic score and a 31% audience score, which I was kind of surprised the audience score was quite a bit lower because, to be honest with you, I thought this would be a much more audience-pleasing movie than a critics-pleasing movie, if I'm going to be honest with you.
Yeah, me too. That's actually kind of why I wanted to do it for the show, because, well, we'll get to it. But yeah, the way people responded to this movie is kind of weird to me when I really think about it.
Well, what's interesting is that, never mind. We'll get to the Amazon reviews because the Amazon reviews are totally different than the Rotten Tomatoes scores. Probably the most disparate I've maybe ever seen for the show. It's crazy. Like, it's pretty much universally loved on Amazon, which I think is very interesting. It's got one of the highest average Amazon scores of anything we've ever reviewed. And there's a lot of reviews, too. There's like 3,000 reviews. So it's not just like 5 weirdos. You know what I mean?
It's not like 5 guys that just fucking love the Phantom.
All right, well, speaking of 5 weirdos, so let's get into the synopsis here. So the movie begins in the early 16th century. A young boy helplessly witnesses his father killed by Kabai Seng, played by fantastic actor Kari Hiroyuki Tagawa, otherwise known as the original Shang Tsung in the Mortal Kombat movie. And stay tuned, there is another Mortal Kombat actor in this movie in a very prominent role, which is very hilarious. The ruthless pirate leader of the Seng Brotherhood, who attacked their ship. The boy jumps overboard and is washed ashore on Bengala, an island where local tribesmen find him and take him to their village. There he is given the skull ring, swears to devote his life to the destruction of piracy, greed, cruelty, and injustice, and as an adult adopts the identity of the Phantom, a masked avenger. The role of the Phantom is passed on from father to son through 400 years, leading people to believe in a single immortal figure. Now, that whole paragraph that I said, right, is a pretty significant chunk of the early synopsis. In the movie, it takes literally like a minute and a half to get through it. It is one of the best superhero / comic book origin sequences of all time because it's a minute and a half long. I love it.
Everything you need to know. This movie kind of captures, and there's a few other movies too that I considered doing for the podcast before I landed on this one. This weird moment for superhero and comic book based films, or in this case, comic strip based films, right? The Tim Burton Batman films kind of prove they're viable, like in the modern day, but they don't really know what a comic book movie is or how to do it. And so you get all these weird properties. Of course, you get like Steel a little bit after this, and you get things like The Shadow, which is a contemporary of the original Phantom comic. They're both Depression era comic strips, Dick Tracy and things. And it's just this weird thing where in the 90s, movie studios were like, oh, people really want Depression era nostalgia.
Yeah, and outside of Dick Tracy, I don't think that was a very profitable venture. I'll be honest with you.
And even Dick Tracy, I think, is like, when people talk about it, it's got a complicated legacy. Like, I love that movie, but I would say it's the way it's looked back on is mixed.
That's actually a really good point. I think maybe Dick Tracy is really the only notable, like, fairly successful one that I can think of, because I think it actually did pretty well critically, if I'm not mistaken. Or
yeah, I think so, and I think it's awesome. But this and The Shadow, and then The Rocketeer, which is not based on it's an original character by Disney, but it may as well be based on a golden age superhero. It's so of that mold.
Exactly. So after our little sequence here, in 1938, Kit Walker, played by Billy Zane, and the next trivia fact I have here is Billy Zane was a huge fan of the Phantom, having been introduced to the comics while filming the movie Dead Calm, which I thought was interesting.
Oh,
And
cool.
the very next trivia fact I had here, because it was a twofer here. So Bruce Campbell and Kevin Smith, not that Kevin Smith, a totally different Kevin Smith, were considered for the role of the Phantom, which I'll be honest with you, I would have fucking loved Bruce Campbell.
He would
Holy
have been awesome.
shit.
I mean, I also love Billy Zane, but I would have loved to see Bruce Campbell. I think he would have been great in this role.
No, honestly, Billy Zane, he's solid in this movie. I think we need to admit, Brian, he's fucking hot as shit in this movie. He's
Oh,
buff and handsome. It's just, man.
yeah, I remember I sent you a message yesterday and I said, Billy Zane really never got the leading man credit that he was kind of set up for. Like, kind of crazy.
Well,
He's
that's the thing. Like Bruce Campbell, is a very similar actor, a very, traditionally handsome man who never really got that leading role thing. Although to be fair, I think for him, it was probably a bit more of his choice than Billy Zane from the seams of it.
seems like he maybe got kind of sick of like doing just whatever movie. But in both of those cases, it's like, oh, these are like classic Hollywood leading men almost, especially for like adventure roles, but they just never quite cook into the wider culture the way that seems like they should have.
Exactly. They tried cooking, and the general audience was like, don't let him cook. But yeah, so he is the 21st Phantom. He finds Quill, played by James Remar. That's our other Mortal Kombat actor. One of the most, and I love James Remar, but one of the most baffling casting choices of all time. James Remar as Raiden in Mortal Kombat Annihilation. Bizarre.
Yeah. Well, a lot about Mortal Kombat Annihilation is baffling.
Yeah, that's a bad movie. I mean, that is actually on our
Bad.
list of movies we're going to review. And boy, that is a bad fucking, maybe the single worst video game movie that's not an Uwe
It's
Boll
awful,
movie.
which is interesting because the first Mortal Kombat film is arguably the best video game based film, in my opinion.
But no, James Remar, he's great in everything. I've loved him in Dexter. He was, I think his very first film role ever was in The Warriors, which is, of course, a classic movie. He was the guy who got arrested after trying to rape that undercover female cop in the park, if you remember that scene.
Yes.
Yeah, that was James Remar in that movie. So, great character, obviously. Great person. No, I'm just kidding. But, but he's
My
leading...
favorite character.
Yeah, right. He leads a group of grave robbers in the jungle. They are searching a burial place for one of the skulls of Taganda, which grants its owners a tremendously destructive power. The Phantom saves the native boy they kidnapped to be their guide and captures Quill's men, leaving them for the Jungle Patrol to pick up, which I found that very interesting. There's like a Jungle Patrol in this movie, which to me are coded as like British colonial like overseers. And they're like, yeah, we're going to catch these pirates. Because, that's the thing that British colonial overseers were really good at, was stopping piracy of like local indigenous populations. They were really
that was
good
the thing
at that.
they cared about for sure.
Yeah, it's like, listen, we love our tea and making sure that criminals get their due comeuppance by not stealing from locals. They were very good at that. But, never mind. It's a throwback to pulp shit. Doesn't matter. Revealed to be a Sang Brotherhood member and the man who killed Kit's father, Patrick McGowan, who plays Kit's father, whose ghost frequently appears to give Kit advice. Quill flees with the skull and returns to the United States. In New York City, Kit's college ex-girlfriend, Diana Palmer, played by the actor Christy Swanson, is a frequent traveler whose uncle Dave Palmer, played by the actor Bill Smitrovich, is the famous owner of the World Tribune newspaper. Now, this synopsis does not get into this little party that they have at the house where our main antagonist shows up. But interestingly enough, Brian, the next trivia fact I have here is the exterior of that house was the Playboy Mansion. So I think
that's the only house in real life that actually looked like that in the 90s.
And apparently Hugh Hefner was a big fan of the Phantom comics. So
he would be. That's from when he was in his 40s. That's when they came out.
Yeah, he was an old fart. Holy fuck. The paper has been investigating power-hungry businessman Xander Drax, played by, rest in peace once again, Treat Williams, who was, of course, in The Late Shift, a shady character with a reputation for dealing with criminals. And also, need to go back, Treat Williams is fucking fantastic in this movie. He is so fucking good. He is just like a scummy, like ultra-rich capitalist criminal asshole. He's
robber
so good.
baron. Yeah.
Oh, God. Yeah, he is a perfect comic book robber baron type character. Holy shit, he's so good in this movie.
Yeah, he's one of the most engaging characters to watch on the screen. Very fun, very lively, just a perfect like Lex Luthor-esque like intellectual foil for the Phantom, who's of course like more of like a brute strength hero.
Exactly. So yeah, 100%. Treat Williams, another great casting choice. Palmer has uncovered Drax's connection to a mysterious spiderweb symbol, which he traces back to the Bengala jungle. He sends Diana to investigate, but makes the mistake of telling New York's corrupt police commissioner, who is allied with Drax, of Diana's trip. Drax's female air pirates, led by femme fatale Sala, played by Catherine Zeta-Jones, I think, of course, at this point, the woman most famous for giving Michael Douglas throat cancer. I think you and I
Yes.
hijack the plane. Diana is abducted and taken to their waterfront base in Bengala. Having been informed of Diana's abduction by the Jungle Patrol's captain, Philip Horton, played by the actor Robert Colby, the Phantom rescues her and escapes from Quill and his men to his headquarters, the Skull Cave, which that's another fantastic little, like, yeah, you're talking about Depression era comic book thing. Like, our hero has a giant cave shaped like a skull.
That's awesome. That's one of my favorite fucking things about this movie. I've actually never really, I've seen some of the Phantom comic strips. I've never sat down and like read them, but if it's full of stuff like that, I'd love to. I love stuff like that.
And before we continue on more with the synopsis here, I want to describe the Phantom's look. And the only way I can describe him as he looks like Pink Guy's cousin. He's purple. He's just a guy in a purple suit and like really thick eyeliner.
Like a purple wetsuit, yeah.
And you know what? I love, that's another, just once again, talk about like Great Depression era thing. It's like, you know, this guy who's the 21st generation of these like guys who, you know, stop piracy in this, like, I think in the comic it's originally in Africa, but in this movie it's like in like the Andaman Islands of India or something, like totally different part of the world. But like, of course, those people, you know, they're well known for all purple bodysuits. It's just fantastic. I love it. It's so goofy.
So I had not watched this until last night when doing preparation for this episode. I hadn't watched this since I was like, I used to like it when I was a kid, like when I was 6, 7. But I remember even as a kid thinking, is he supposed to look funny or cool? Like I wasn't really sure. I think I don't know. Well, here's what I think thinking about it while watching it last night. Again, I don't think they'd quite figured out what a superhero movie in live action was. And so they're thinking, and this is a thing I like about superhero films from this earlier era, they're thinking, look, this is for fans of the character. We should try to make it look as much like the classic character in live action as we can. Now, Marvel and more recent DC movies, but especially the Marvel movies, they've been cranking out fucking forever for the last 20 years, have shown us that sometimes you can do that, right? Sometimes you can do Spider-Man and you can capture this iconic suit that was made for one medium and it can look really cool in live action. But sometimes it's something like the X-Men's yellow spandex and it's just not gonna look right in live action.
You know, Brian, we were talking about Steel earlier, the Shaquille O'Neal movie, and like they were still working out those kinks bad because he looks horrendous in that movie.
That's another example. You look at him and you go, is this supposed to be funny? It's kind of an uncanny valley effect where you're like, some of this seems like it's supposed to be cool, but it looks so goofy. And even though I think this is a cool movie, and I think obviously as far as comic strip heroes, the Phantom has this great, simple, iconic design, but I mean, Zane does look silly in the costume, especially when he's got the like wetsuit clinging around his head.
Well, and you know, another trivia fact I had here that I didn't include on here, but I might as well bring it up now. But apparently initially, like his purple suit was supposed to have like fake muscles because they didn't think he could like gain enough muscle in time. But like they didn't have to do it because he was willing to get like super fit for the role. But just imagine that he'd be a purple guy in like inflatable muscles. It would look even worse.
I'm so glad that Zane got the muscles done because that would have looked so bad.
God, it would have looked like a shitty Halloween costume now.
Yeah, it absolutely would have.
It would look like those guys who inject synthol in their biceps to get buff.
Oh my God, that's hellish.
All right, so back to the synopsis here. In New York, now dresses as his civilian self, Kit meets with David Palmer at the World Tribune and once again meets with Diana, who has mixed feelings about him since his sudden disappearance several years before. And I think I may have glossed this over, but him and Diana used to be a thing. But we never actually see that in the movie. It's just stated. So we don't really know that, but it's just stated. Diana's would-be suitor, Jimmy Wells, played by the actor John Tenney, mentions he had seen one of the skulls in the Museum of World History. So Kit and Diana hurry there. Drax and his men capture them, steal the second skull, and unite it with the first, revealing the location of the third skull on an uncharted island in the Andaman Sea, known as the Devil's Vortex. Now, once again, before we get into this continuing synopsis here, there is a really interesting scene where him and like his like bad guy goons are all in a room together, and Drax is like, listen, you're going to do what I say. And one of the guys is like, listen, I don't believe in any power that doesn't come out of the barrel of a gun. And I'm like, wow, they just dropped a Mao quote in this fucking movie. I think it's absolutely fucking hilarious. Like, and I don't think they probably meant to do that, right? Like, do you think the filmmakers are particularly big fans of like Chairman Mao quotes or what?
They might not even have known the quote was Mao, but I bet they heard the quote and they were like, that's fucking cold. I got to put that in a movie.
And also, there's another scene I totally forgot, but I think it's one of the like newspaper editors or like one of the columnists or whatever is going to Drax's like compound, and he's like, "You won't tell anybody about what we're doing." Oh no, it's a librarian. That's what he is. And he's like, "You won't tell anybody what we're doing in the future." Right? He's like, "No, I have all the confidential information." He's like, "Okay, that's good, but real quick, you want to look in this very suspicious device and make sure you really focus on it." And then, like, when he does, it stabs his eyes out.
That's awesome.
So fucking awesome. I love that goofy ass shit.
That's the type of thing. That is like classic, like comic strip hero kind of villain set piece stuff. Is like, oh, we're trapping you with this bizarre artifact.
Yeah. It works with the movie. And then also, like, the guy who does the Mao quote, he gets impaled by Drax with, like, was it a spear or something?
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't even know if that would work. I don't even know if it could go through someone like that.
Honestly, but if it did, though, like, Drax has fucking strength. Holy shit. Like, we were joking that he's just, like, a regular, like, hyper-capitalist guy, but maybe he's, like, super strong underneath that fucking suit. Who knows?
Well, then why doesn't he ever fucking fight the Phantom? Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself.
Honestly, what would have been really funny is if it was, like, that fucking guy in Ichi the Killer, and when he takes off his suit, he's just like a giant muscle man underneath.
Oh, that would have been awesome. Billy Zane and this monstrosity of muscle have to fucking box.
But it still looks like Treat Williams.
Yeah, and the head. The head is Treat Williams, and the body is just this fucking monster, like, bodybuilder.
Yeah, he looks like one of those, like, 90s, like, ultra-roided bodybuilders, but it's just Treat Williams' head on top of it.
Yeah, like, photoshopped on.
That would have been fucking awesome. Jeez, but Kip manages to escape, and as the Phantom, evades the police outside the museum. Meanwhile, after Sala reveals that Diana is the Phantom's girlfriend, she flies Drax, Quill, and Diana to the Devil's Vortex, not knowing that the Phantom has managed to hitch a ride on one of the plane's landing pontoons. All right, so after that, they eventually make it to the island. Drax meets with pirate Tabai Seng, who's also still played by Kiri Hiroyuki Tagawa, which is fine. It's one of those things where, just 400 years before and 400 years after, they're just the exact same person. That's totally fine.
This is a movie where I'm fine with those types of leaps of logic. It's cool.
No, exactly. It's a comic book movie, but still. So, direct descendant of the Brotherhood's original leader, who possesses the third skull. Sang warns Drax of the fourth skull's existence, which controls the power of the other three. I don't know, this kind of sounds like a ripoff of Legend of Zelda, if I'm being honest with you. There's just the Triforce, but it's now the Quadriforce, I guess? I don't know. It's the Quadriforce of skulls, I guess.
Yeah, the Quad Force.
Yeah. The Phantom appears and battles both men, with Kabai Sang killed by sharks, and Diana and Sayla cooperate to defeat the other villains. Drax unites the three skulls and turns their power against the Phantom. And this whole segment is fantastic. So James Remar's character just gets hit by it and disintegrates, just cheesy shit. And then the Phantom uses the fourth skull, his own magic ring, to turn the skulls back against Drax. It's so great. It's
pure comic book. It is
pure comic book, yeah. And then eventually Drax gets destroyed before screaming like, "Oh!" and then he gets disintegrated himself. It's fantastic.
I truly love this shit, and I really miss it. I know I harp on how everything's gloomy and gritty and it's boring and it doesn't make for a fun adventure. And I understand, there are objectively cases where, and I've read a lot of comic books. I know a lot about superhero lore and all that shit. So I understand that there's an argument that, heroes like Batman and even and the X-Men and even sometimes Spider-Man, their audiences have grown up and they can be a little edgier sometimes. But I really hate that all superhero stuff is, void of this, fantasy and wonder and just absurdity. Someone gets eaten by sharks in this movie.
Well, that's the thing, Brian. I think you and I would both agree that Superman just killing Zod by breaking his neck and everything just black and dull and gray is so much better than this. I think we can all agree on that.
Well, not only better than this, but of course it's better than the original Superman 2 film, which is just some silly, light, family-friendly romp that sucks compared to the Snyder Superman, obviously.
Oh, man, he is my favorite Green Bay-born individual. He's so cool. I love Zack Snyder. He's so cool.
He's definitely from Green Bay.
Isn't that just the funniest thing? Like, he didn't grow up there, but he was born there. But he is like the most like what a Green Bay guy thinks is cool. Like,
Yes.
seriously.
Yeah. Well, as soon as you said that, I was like, oh, that does kind of make sense, actually. Just
Jesus Christ.
gray.
Yeah, just
Gray.
Brian, I think you're confusing Green Bay with a place that is not sunny and beautiful and tropical. It's the most tropical location in the world.
Not just sad and boring and snowy, dirty. It's not really dirty, actually.
It's yeah, the one thing it's not dirty, but all those
It's
other
not
things just
dirty.
absolutely is the rest of those things. Oh, but never mind. So to end the film, they escape from the island, and Diana reveals to the Phantom that she has figured out his secret and double identity. Kit removes his mask, telling her that he can only disclose all of his secrets to one person, the woman he intends to marry, because of course
Ooh, that's so good.
he's a trad guy, of course, of course.
That's such a good Mac line.
Yeah. So, but then they separate, they go their separate ways, and eventually they'll return, which they never do because there was never another movie. The end. So, and before I get into my final thoughts, I have one thing to say before we get to the Amazon reviews. I think, and maybe you disagree with me on this, Brian. So, of course, this movie was written by the guy who wrote The Last Crusade, the Indiana Jones movie.
Yes.
But what this really reminds me of, it kind of reminds me of that too, obviously. But what this really reminds me of is this reminds me of a proof of concept of like the Mummy, the Brendan Fraser Mummy.
Well, I think all those things, right? They're all the Phantom film, Indiana Jones, the Mummy. They're all kind of drawing from the same well, and that's not bad.
And I think that's honestly why The Mummy did obviously much more financially successful and also critically successful than this movie. Is that like this movie, even though I do like this movie, I want to be very clear. I think this movie is missing just a few elements to be considered a like 90s classic that I think The Mummy later was able to kind of like add to it and create like a more cohesive and a better impression of a movie than this movie did. And once again,
absolutely more accessible.
That doesn't mean this movie's bad. I want that to be very clear, but this movie feels just a slight bit incomplete for me.
I agree 100%. I think that when you look at this movie, I don't want to belabor the point, but it is a studio still trying to figure out how do we make this comic strip superhero medium? How do we make this work in live action? How kid friendly is it? How kid focused is it? How fantastical is it? How edgy is it? And then there is a market for like Depression era and Golden Age nostalgia. And by the 90s, there definitely was. But you still kind of need to tweak it a bit. You need to tighten it up so that the kids who aren't familiar with that era will still be able to sink in. Because I think this movie, as a throwback to that era, to old serials, if you are someone who would have been, I guess, in your 50s in the 90s, who would have grown up with the original stuff this was based on, the comic strips and the Saturday afternoon serials, you probably would have loved this, I'd imagine. But if you're just a kid in the 90s and you're watching this, you might be like, why do I care about this guy? What a movie like The Mummy does, and I think Indiana Jones is another example, is they take all of these time-tested concepts from this golden age of adventure stories, and they make it feel contemporary to the kids watching in the 80s in Indiana Jones case and in the 90s in the Mummy's case.
Yes, very, very much so. And, it's one of those things too where I think this movie just kind of came out at a wrong time. Like, I think if this movie had came out in the 80s with like contemporary, like 80s special effects and all that, I think this would probably be seen as a classic today, I'll be honest with you. I think it easily could have been.
I think, I agree. I think that when this came out, there was a lot of shifts happening. So I think the 90s is a great period for action adventure, probably my favorite period for that genre. But while you've got on one hand, you've got your Jurassic Parks, your Terminator 2s, you do have a lot of stuff like The Phantom, which again, I like a lot. You've got this stuff that kind of feels, does it feel, is it mean to say a little meandering?
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit like it's like we've got this character, this iconic character, the Phantom. It's an adventure story, and you kind of push through. On a story level, my big issue with this movie, and I said it to you too, is we get our intellectual superior in our villain to the Phantom, but there isn't really at any point a physical threat. There's no big baddie that he can like really brawl with in the climax to give us like a really satisfying final battle. It drives me crazy.
It's one of those things where, once again, I enjoyed this movie, but I think there's some unrealized potential that stopped it from being a like essential 90s classic film. But once again, not bad. I want that to be very clear. Honestly, Brian, I want to contrast this with another movie that you chose that was another box office bomb and an often forgotten movie that you chose recently, which was Tomorrowland. And Brian,
Yeah.
this is 100 times more entertaining than Tomorrowland. I liked this so much more.
Well, I think this is a cool movie. Like I do. I agree with you. It's a lot of missed potential here. For me, this type of colorful, bright, pulpy adventure story that like doesn't take itself too seriously, but does take itself at face value. This is right up my alley. So even though it's not a great film by any means, it does work for me. One of my other thoughts watching this last night is if you made a movie like this now, it would have to border on self-parody. Everything has to be like smug and like, oh, can you believe we're doing this cheesy thing? You know what I mean? And it kind of, for me, it deflates it. I don't like that shit. But the thing that I do like about this movie is that it's not afraid to be cheesy or campy, but it also isn't feeling the need to like do these little asides and show you how much more clever it is than the source material or whatever. It just embraces being that.
Brian, I think there's one scene though that I think they kind of allude to that, but it's pretty momentary, which is the scene where Catherine Zeta-Jones' character, I can't remember their name, so I'm just gonna say Catherine Zeta-Jones' character, and Drax are all in a room together, and fucking Quill says something along the lines of, "No, I killed him," and he's like, "Well, that doesn't sound possible," or something like that. And he's like, "He's back."
That's a little bit of that, but like what you would get in say the 2000s or the 2010s would be some shit like Turbo Kid.
Yeah, or
which
like
is like
Drax would have been like, "Well, that happened."
Yeah, exactly. He would have been like, or he would have been like, "What did you expect me to do? Start doing a super villain monologue?"
Yeah, it's trying to be too smart for its own good. Whereas this movie, it's just a couple allusions to that, but it's fine, especially for how jaded we are in the modern like comic book age. It's quaint. It's fine. It is totally fine.
Like as a kid, I think that I did enjoy this movie as a kid, but I also kind of did think like, oh, I'd rather be watching Batman or I'd rather be watching some other hero, most of the time. Watching this now, the whole reason I picked this is because I didn't know if it would hold up. My whole reason for picking this for the podcast was to look at how different, as we have before, superhero movies were from what they are now, what they became. But also because I know that I always say, oh, action movies, adventure movies, superheroes, they were so much better in the 90s because I'm an old millennial. And I was thinking to myself, what if I pick a movie that bombed, that a lot of people don't like, a superhero movie from that era, and I test my own thesis? And I was kind of trying to take myself to task to say, maybe I look at the 90s action adventure movies through rose-tinted goggles. Maybe if I pick a lesser film from that era, I won't like it as much, and I'll appreciate kind of more contemporary superhero films more. That did not happen. Even recognizing this movie's faults, I still think that this is so much more entertaining, and it's so refreshing to me to watch something like this that just is fun and adventurous and has a giant skull cave.
Yeah. Well, Brian, and we're going to get into the Amazon reviews in just a second, but I want to mention one more thing, at least on my end. I watched Sin City for the first time last night, which is the exact opposite of this movie in basically every single way.
Yeah, I don't like that movie.
Well, to be fair, I'll say I personally enjoyed it. I wouldn't say it's my favorite comic book movie at all or anything like that, but I personally enjoyed it for what it was. It was trying to be mid-2000s edgy, whatever, obviously. But it is the total opposite of this movie. And I will say I enjoyed this movie more, even though Sin City is much more critically acclaimed than this movie. I like this movie more, I'm going to be honest with you.
I've read the first volume of the Sin City comic books by Frank Miller, which I did enjoy at the time. For me, I find the visuals of Sin City very distracting.
They are very distracting, I will say.
But I understand that the same thing, someone could tell me the same thing about the visuals of The Phantom, and I could not argue with them.
Yeah, it's all about aesthetics, right? But anyways, before we get to our final thoughts, let's get into these Amazon reviews, because I told you earlier, Brian, these are the exact opposite opinions on this versus on Rotten Tomatoes. Like, the overwhelming majority of people on Amazon liked this movie. Like, it had one of the highest 5-star ratings of anything I've seen in a long time. So our first Amazon review here is from Amazon customer, of course, our most beloved individual who gives us 5 stars. And the head of the review says, "Poor ad campaign sabotaged this great movie." Now, before I get into the body of this review here, this was another rare pre-9/11 review. We actually have 2 pre-9/11 reviews on here. So that was really interesting to see. I always love seeing the pre-9/11 reviews.
Well, appropriate because, this is a very pre-9/11 movie.
Holy shit, is it ever? And the body of the review says, "The Phantom is one of the classic comic strip characters whose adventures still appear in newspapers all over the world. I don't think in the year 2024, but once again, this is like a 25-year-old review.
Phantom strips were in newspapers for a long time, so but in the 2000s probably still.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Ugly posters and a dumb slogan, "Slam Evil," caused poor box office for a film which got excellent reviews and which would have been a hit if only it had been properly promoted. Now, this movie did not get good critical reviews. Once again, it had a 44% on Rotten Tomatoes, which that means less than half of critics gave this a positive review. I would not say that it's got excellent reviews. I want that to be very clear
Yeah, I
here.
mean, it seems like it got okay reviews, and it might even be just because a lot of critics at the time, professional critics, were of the right age where they remembered stuff like this from their childhoods.
Exactly. The writer of the Phantom film previously wrote Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and he is true to the Lee Falk character while bringing a modern sensibility to the character. Lots of action, good fun. And they also added an addendum in 2010. So this person came back to the review like 11 years later. That's really
Awesome.
some commitment.
Based.
I had hoped the Blu-ray would restore the footage of the audio cut to get the film down to 100 minutes. Apparently not. I'll buy another copy if they ever release an extended edition. So,
this is a good review.
Yeah, honestly, a pretty good review. Honestly, a lot of the 5-star reviews were really, really good, but I wanted to find one that had an explanation for maybe why this film didn't do very good, because most of the 5-star ones were, I'll be honest, very long. We talk about meandering with the film plot. They're very meandering. They just went over a lot of the details that we went over, so I didn't think it was very appropriate to just have that be one of the reviews here. So this was one of the more concise, I think, solid 5-star reviews here. But the rest of the reviews here, Brian, are, oh boy.
Oh no.
Even though only 10% of the reviews were under 5 stars, the best reviews were the 4-star and under reviews. These are fucking hilarious reviews. So Stephen Wagner gives us 4 stars. And the head of the review says, "The best terrible movie." And the body of the review says, "Imagine watching something that is racist, full of logic and plot holes, has bad lines, and has bad taste. If you can't, watch this. If you love to hate movies for any of the above, enjoy this." And
really?
I don't understand what they're saying with this at all.
I mean, I don't really think this is racist. It's just kind of silly.
Yeah, I mean, just like any of those old comic serials, you have Orientalism and all that. Sure, whatever. But really outside of...
This is significantly less offensive than anything from the actual era that it's paying tribute to.
Yeah, because they're the POC actors, there's a young Indonesian something child who exists. They're not racist to him. He's just a small child who doesn't speak English. And then there is, Kari Hiroyuka Tagawa's character who is just a bad guy who's not a stereotypical Asian racist character. He just exists. There's nothing particularly racist about this, especially in comparison to when we reviewed the Superman comic book stuff.
Yeah, dear God, some of that was, and that was a fucking drag.
Yeah, that's 1% as racist as this. Even if you could it's 1% milk of that.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know what this person's talking about, but I had to include that because I'm this person just sounds dumb. I'll be honest.
I just don't is this movie that bad? I mean, I understand if someone isn't into it. I don't think it's a great movie, but is it really one of the worst movies you've ever seen, man?
If that's the case, you need to watch more movies. Goddamn.
Yeah, no kidding.
And then this next reviewer is dumb based on their anxiety. But this person, Inquisitive Guareza, gives this 1 star. And the head of the review says, "Always double check the microscope before using it." And the body of the review says, "Boring and tedious. Everything from this film, including the cheesy story, the bad acting, the cardboard lead, Billy Zane in parentheses, who always seems to be the baddie, so that's all I know him for." And I think they're referencing he was one of the bad guys in Titanic, but that's all I really know Billy
And
Zane.
he's the bad guy in Demon Knight.
Fair enough. The only thing I think about from this film is the disturbing eye-stabbing microscope sequence, which, as we mentioned, is a pretty good sequence.
Oh, it's awesome.
Which really didn't fit the tone of a vanilla superhero film. I entirely disagree with that.
I disagree. All these old, Golden Age superhero stories, they always had some gnarly villain death thing. This is pre-code comics, baby.
Yeah, no, I entirely disagree with this reviewer. I think that fits entirely appropriately with this.
Yeah,
kind of
he doesn't know what he's talking about.
I mean, if it was a slasher movie thing where it comes out and stabs it through the eye and you just see him gushing gallons of blood, then okay, yeah, probably not. But just you hear the scream in the distance as this horrible thing happens, that sounds about right.
No, that's very on brand.
Exactly.
That's the one moment in here where they're showing you that our villains really are nasty.
Exactly. And then the final sentence, and this is the one that I want to include. This is the whole reason I include this review on here because I think it's hilarious in hindsight. I think at the time, this one device spooked me away from a scientific career, just knowing Treat Williams could be out there somewhere with one of those things. Well, now in year 2024, you can go back to school because Treat Williams won't do that to you anymore. Once again, rest in peace to Treat Williams. Oh, God, yeah. So
this guy, mostly I disagree with, but I like his last bit.
I genuinely think it's hilarious that I never heard the name Treat Williams until I heard that news story about the guy who accidentally killed him was in trial, and then you recommended 2 movies he was in.
Yeah, it was serendipitous. It was meant to be.
It's just absolutely fucking hilarious. And then our final review here is from another hilarious reviewer. And this is the other pre-9/11, barely pre-9/11. I think this was like August 2001 or something. So holy shit, so close. So LP Quagmire, which I think was a 2000s like punk vocalist, if I'm not mistaken, named after
LP Quagmire.
You would think like, oh, that's like a 80s punk hardcore guy. But it's like, no, he just named himself after the fucking Family Guy character. But not.
Yeah.
He gave this 1 star. And the head of the review says, "What a menace!" And the body of the review says, "Bloated, misguided attempt by George Moneybags Lucas to recapture the magic of his original Star Wars trilogy, strictly for the crayon set, who likely would have nodded off before the end of the opening title scroll. The only thing the film has going for it is the delightful Jar Jar Binks, a character who sounds like Regis Philbin but looks like Seinfeld's Kramer." Now, Brian, you may be thinking, did I actually mean to grab this from the Phantom Menace review on Amazon? But no, this was on the Phantom Amazon entry.
This guy's awesome.
And what's funny is that this was the very last review on here. And I'm like, I got to the finish line. I was thinking about just doing the 3, but I found this very last review. And I'm like, did this motherfucker review the wrong movie? And he clearly did.
This rules. Did anyone find this review helpful?
One person did, and it was not me. It was not me. I promise you that.
Oh, awesome.
Oh my God. So yeah, LP Quagmire, once again, you have the best hardcore band vocalist name of all time.
Big fan of LP Quagmire.
Oh, but yeah, so those are our Amazon reviews. So Brian, do we have any final thoughts before we go to our pluggables?
You know what? I would say if anyone has listened to the show and they've heard my thoughts about modern action adventure being kind of gray and militaristic and lifeless and not fun, you should watch The Phantom. It's a good time. It's not a great movie. I actually think its flaws are at times pretty glaring. None of them are inexcusable, but they're pretty glaring at times. I find it very fun to watch. I was watching it. I was actually pretty stressed out yesterday, and I got home and I was like, well, I'm ready to watch The Phantom. And I had my air conditioner on. It's getting hot here. And I was watching The Phantom, and I had, my dinner with me, and I really felt like, oh, I feel like I'm like watching like a Sunday afternoon like adventure movie, like I after school or something. It was very refreshing, which maybe also says more about where I'm at in my life right now. But it was very good to watch a movie like this. And I think if you like Indiana Jones and you like The Mummy, The Phantom isn't like on that level, but you might like it. If you watch those movies a bunch and you want more in that kind of milieu, I would say watch The Phantom.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to echo your statements because I had a bit of a stressful week myself. Not going to get into personal details. I mean, we're old millennials. We already have, therapists that we do, I'm trying to think of like what like Zoomers always talk about.
This is my therapy. Millennial men would literally rather start a podcast than go to therapy.
Yeah, exactly. But no, I had a bit of a stressful week myself. So honestly, being able to sit down and watch something, goofy, pulpy, and just reminded me of a lot of 90s cheese for me. It was just really good. And, once again, I will echo your viewpoints. Like, there are definitely a couple flaws here and there. Once again, not inexcusable, but there are flaws here. But if you're looking for, a swashbuckling 80s, 90s action adventure pulp thing, which of course, obviously the most famous example is Indiana Jones. And then next is like The Mummy and stuff like that. If you're really into those kind of movies, I would 100% recommend this. You will get a lot of enjoyment out of it. I would never say it would be anybody's favorite version of that, but it is a solid romp.
And the thing is that as time goes on, there are fewer and fewer movies like this. I'm going to be real. Sometimes I think like maybe I should finally watch Sky Captain in the World of Tomorrow, which at the time I thought looked awful. And now I'm like, oh, they're never going to make an adventure movie like that again. Maybe I should give it a shot.
I mean, like, I think the closest we've got recently is the fucking Dune movies. I think that's the closest we've gotten recently as far as I can think of.
Right, but I feel like that has like a literary precursor, so it's not quite the same. I do need to see them.
I will say personally that they're good movies 2 is fantastic. I'll be honest with you, I fell asleep during Dune 2, but that was not because of the movie itself. So I don't remember all of it, but I will say they're both good movies. Dune 2, I will say, is definitely better, though. No question it's better.
Yeah, I was waiting for both of them to be out so I could just watch them both at once. But like really like as far as like the fun adventure movie, like what has come out that's been a big movie in the last 10 years? Like I think I said to you, the last character kind of in this mold that I think became somewhat iconic was Hellboy, and really only the first movie in that series had any sort of audience that I'm aware of.
And I can tell you what, I told you last night, or I think it was the other night, when they made the David Harbour one. Holy fuck.
Yeah,
That
I
movie is
avoided that one.
horrible. Like legitimately one of the worst movies I've ever paid money for on like a Blu-ray.
It looked so bad. I straight up
Oh,
avoided it.
God. And that's the thing, David Harbour was in one of our favorite cult movies recently, which was, of course, Violent Night. And then he's also in
Yeah.
that pile of shit. Yeah,
Violent
crazy.
Night is almost as far as a fun adventure movie, although that's paying homage to a different era of action adventure than this is. So
Oh, for
not
sure.
really
Yeah,
the same.
for sure. But yeah, so that is our review of The Phantom. So to get into our pluggables, as always, you can follow me at Carlos Chantor on twitter.com. And as well, please follow and listen to us on both our Spotify and our YouTube channel, where we are uploading every episode simultaneously to both platforms. And as well, please donate to the Lucifer and the Father GoFundMe. Of course, they're gaining donations pretty much every day at this point. We want to see a part 2 of this fantastic series. Please be part of making that dream a reality.
Yeah. If anyone donates to Lucifer and the Father and then can demonstrate to me some sort of proof that they have donated because they've come through the Millennials Are Old podcast, please show me something to tell me that you came because of us, and I will match your donation within reason.
Same. I will 100% mirror that. I will do the exact same thing.
As well, as always, follow us on Millennials Are Old Pod on Instagram and the Millennials Are Old Facebook page. And please, especially on the Facebook page, if you want to send me any weird boomer or zoomer or coomer pages that you find that you think we should analyze, talk about, be afraid of, because we're getting older and we're in fear of change, reach out.
Yeah, that one song, what is it, the David Bowie song, Cha-Cha-Cha Changes? We're afraid of Cha-Cha Changes, that's for sure.
I just wish it was 2006 again and I could just be playing PlayStation 2.
Brian, yeah, I wish I could go back 2006, 2007. I could just put in Killer 7 and, listen to My Chemical Romance and think, God, this is peak culture right here.
And the thing is, sometimes I think back to 2008, 2009 when I was on the forums, and I think that's when I made all my best posts.
Yeah.
I just want to go back.
I really do love it. I feel like I'm one of the only people out there who played Killer 7 when it came out and yeah, this is peak. I feel like I'm the only person that did that.
You and one other friend of mine both are Killer 7 proponents back in the day.
What's funny, and obviously we're going to end the review very shortly, but I do want to say something really funny is that I remember, and this was back when Shopko was still around, and of course Shopko's not around anymore, the premier Green Bay fucking retail outlet. And I remember I got Killer 7 in a bundle. And this was an insane, it was $20, I remember. And it was 2 GameCube games in a bundle together. It was Killer 7 and Def Jam Fight for New York. What a weird combo of video games.
What a great collection.
And what's hilarious is that those are some of the most valuable GameCube games now. Straight up,
amazing.
Def Jam Fight for New York is $200 and Killer 7's $100. And there's $20 brand new in the box.
What a time to be alive.
Yeah, God, Jesus Christ. That's the thing. I'm really glad they never put Diddy in Def Jam Fight for New York. That would have been a hilarious time capsule.
Well, I mean, he was in enough other things.
That is very true. Yeah. I don't know if you've seen recently, of course, because I guess he's still being chased by U.S. Marshals. I guess, I don't know. But he recently took 2 pictures in the same bar with Amy Schumer and fucking Jerry Seinfeld. And I'm how the fuck do Jerry Seinfeld and Amy Schumer know where Diddy is and taking pictures with him?
Based.
Jesus Christ. We always talk about CIA assets and stuff like that, but God, there's some weird shit going on with all 3 of those people. If they're all just hanging out together in the same random bar in New York City or whatever. I don't want to keep talking because we obviously just mentioned Daniel Larson and his threats. We're already going to go to fucking federal prison with all this shit combined.
Bomb you! I'm sorry. It's an intrusive thought.
Yeah.
Why would the FBI arrest this guy who was like, send the FBI after me. I will fucking kill them with a bomb. I'm going to kill the president with a gun.
Yeah. We're gonna
Over and over.
No, I want to be clear, Brian. We are going to kill the president of the Ivory Coast. I want that to be very clear. It is definitely not the United States president because, of course, as we learned from Trevor Moore, that's just the one sentence you can never say.
It is illegal to say that you are going to do that, and you should not say it.
Well, speaking of intrusive thoughts, I have an intrusive thought that I want to go to bed before I get raided by the FBI. So have a good night, Brian. I hear I'm already knocking at my door.
Okay. We'll see you around, Taylor.
See you around. Have a good night.